Good morning, Synod. We start with item 11, for which you will need GS 2420. And you may also wish to refer to the financial statement in notice paper 6. I'm very conscious that the content of this debate may be difficult for some members, so I would encourage you to use the pastoral support team if you need, and you can find them in the chapel or in Bishop Partridge Hall or ask at reception. You'll have also noticed that we have 3 amendments to this motion, so my intention is to allow a few speeches first of all on the main motion once it has been moved, and then we'll turn to the amendments. And I will call members in pairs to speak. So I now invite Dr. Jamie Harrison to move the motion in his name. He has up to 10 minutes.
Jamie Harrison, Durham, 301. Madam Chair, thank you. This is now my 3rd General Synod debate on the subject of mental health and well-being, going back to 2003 and then to 2008. It would be good, wouldn't it, to be able to say that mental health has improved across society in that time, and that the Church and its members have seen an increase in well-being, a greater understanding of mental health and illness, and of learning what it takes to see greater openness and a loss of stigmatization. Sadly, as GS 2420 reminds us, that's not the case. We have the added complexity of the COVID pandemic, the impact of which is still, I believe, being felt. Now, back in 2008, I just finished 18 years working as a part-time GP in the high secure prison in Durham, HMP Frankland, and looking back, I reflect on the level of enduring mental health illness found in those incarcerated in such an environment and wonder at the appropriateness of that setting for them. That may be a discussion for another time, although as Charlie reminded us yesterday, it's very much part of our concerns for our friends in prison. So today we have a series of requests set out in the motion before us. We're asked to affirm the work of the National Mental Health Working Group, ably led by Bishop Richard, the Bishop Bedford, who I think is in the chamber today, and my good friend Professor Chris Cook, who is behind me. Having worked with them both over many years, I can commend them to you. The working group, with its mix of theological and mental health specialists, inhabits that space which encompasses both the spiritual and the psychological, prayer and well-being. What that group tells us is that there is a high prevalence of mental health conditions in the population, and that we, responding as Christians, have a mission imperative, a gospel imperative, for we have good news to share. So where to begin? Let's begin at the beginning, not least in our own experiences of mental health and well-being, or the lack of it. And as we've heard from the chair, it's highly likely that many in this chamber will be suffering with or have suffered from a significant psychological upset. And beyond that, beyond ourselves, to family members, to friends, and to those whom we minister as clergy or professionals in healthcare. And with this comes perhaps doubts and concerns. Where is God in this? Why is it happening to me? And where can I find relief? And that's been certainly true in my own experience as a doctor and a member of a family. Hence, our first request at little a in the motion is to ask dioceses to review the education and training they give to their clergy, both the newly ordained in their second phase of the IME2 of initial curate training, and during the ongoing training of clergy in their CME provision. Now, you may well say that the agendas and curricula of such courses are already over full, but nevertheless we want to raise this concern, this option. And there'll be many in this chamber much better than me to comment on how that might be done, how funded and how practicable. Our second request at little b is directed towards the National Society, that great institution that oversees our church schools. I think we can all agree the challenges facing young people today are immense, not least in the context of social media, body image, gender matters, and how they see their futures unfolding. Note please, this request is for further materials for training in schools and children's groups, for I want to acknowledge already the breadth and quality of the materials we already have in those arenas. So the request is around developing such material in the light of a fast-changing social environment, and in no way do I wish to undermine and undervalue what we already have. At little c, we turn to the Liturgical Commission. Here, the request is for a new focus, or perhaps a deepening focus, or lens through which those drafting our liturgical texts can ensure that issues of mental health and well-being are being considered. Now, the question might be how a text might or might not impact on someone struggling with a mental health disorder. Equally, how much such a text gives space for reflection and affirmation for those in need, not least of the healing character of the Holy Spirit's work. Now, I know, in looking at the bishop concerned, I know that it's not easy to formulate liturgical texts. It's complex, it's nuanced. But I think we're just asking for this new lens, maybe as new texts are produced, to think about, and perhaps to consult with those who already suffer from mental health disturbance. Finally, little d, we come to how best to support and respond to the mental health needs of the ordained. Here I include the full range of our clergy and bishops. The motion speaks of mental health challenges, and together we can think of a whole range of disorders and difficulties, from life-threatening conditions such as psychotic depression to disabling anxiety or the overwhelming sense of struggle and, of course, of burnout. Some of these conditions require intensive medical intervention. This lies outside our remit here. But we do need to be aware of those who are suffering from varying degrees of less extreme, but nevertheless totally disabling mental health issues. The comment in GS 1420 is that the necessary provision in dioceses to respond to such needs is variable. The availability of appropriate counselling and other therapeutic interventions, it's a mixed picture. So it'd be good today to hear of the perceptions from those of you who are providing that provision or have received it or seek it. Equally, for clergy and others to be self-aware in such essential matters, not to be in a state of denial or somehow to feel a failure. No, the state of anxiety or depression is something that Christians, like everyone else, and especially the ordained, have to face, and we must not suggest that they shouldn't have that condition. Mental health issues can appear from nowhere or follow significant periods of overwork, loss, or other life events, or just the pressure of ministry in a hard place. So being self-aware, being open to the wisdom of others, such as a spiritual director, should trigger the need to seek further guidance and help, and we pray that will be available. So as we look beyond ourselves, the needs and concerns of our parishes, our communities, our schools, this is a mission imperative. It's a gospel imperative, for we have good news to share, that we might be informed and able to act through our work, welcome and support, which the church can and should offer. So rather than feeling so often powerless and impotent in these matters, I know we will hear in this debate about the transformative work that goes on in our churches day in, day out, in our schools, in our cathedrals. So this is something that affects the whole church, right across the church. And yet, of course, our debate ultimately is about mental health and the church, not just mental health in the church or mental health for the clergy. We put Christ at the centre. He is the one who meets all our needs, not least those with mental health disorders. And of course, we're also those who should be seeking and working to prevent such matters occurring wherever possible, not always possible. So we'll find encouragement this morning, as well as challenge the need to reinforce our education, to train our curates more fully, for other ministers and chaplains to understand more deeply issues around mental health and well-being, and not least the laity, those who will often be those who come into first contact with those with particular needs. As we look beyond ourselves in this synod to our church schools, to our parishes, to our chaplaincies, and to our cathedrals. I will be supporting all three amendments. So I beg to move, Madam Chair, the item of motion, mental health and the church, standing in my name.
Thank you. This item is therefore open for debate, and the time limit for speeches is 5 minutes. So if I call the member in the red dress and the member in the stripy green, Muriel Robinson. Thank you. So can you just wait a minute? I don't think your microphone's working. Could you try again?
Cat Darcy Cumber, Chelmsford 271. Thank you for calling me. And this is my first speech. I was 23 and I'd never heard of psychosis. I was confused as to what the hell was happening. The doctors were equally unsure. At one point, I was looked at by a neurosurgeon. At another point, they thought I had schizophrenia. The jury was out for quite some time as they worked out how best to deal with me. The actual breakdown probably didn't last very long, but I think I was suffering from the effects of psychosis for months. Those are the words of the actor David Harewood, who experienced a psychotic breakdown not long after leaving drama school. While we have come to understand mental health and its challenges better in recent years, I would like to speak briefly about some of the statistics. Of people detained under the Mental Health Act, those of global majority heritage are disproportionately affected. According to NHS data published in September 2025, those in the any other black background category, which forms part of the black or British category, there were 780.3 detentions per 100,000 people, 12 times the rate of white British people. For those of any other mixed background, people like me, it was 306 per 100,000. And for the Caribbean group, 250.4 per 100,000 compared to 64.9 per 100,000 of white British people. Of course, this isolates data by racial background without taking into account other intersecting factors, such as poverty or disability. But the numbers give a stark message. David Harewood attributes his psychotic breakdown to living in a country surrounded by constant, sometimes blatant, sometimes low-level or even unconscious, but ever-present racism. And there is no doubt that the pressures of being a black or brown person in this country at this moment in time are a constant ringing voice in your head. Despite having been born in what was once the constituency of Winston Churchill, having lived here all my life, having 2 British parents, I have lost count of the times I've been told I could not be British because my skin is the wrong colour. Growing up, it was a common experience to be called names in the street. And while you develop a level of resilience to this, there is always the awareness of difference, of being the only person like you in a particular space. Every time I leave my town, or even pop to the supermarket, I have to drive down roads of flags. And not flags put up for VE Day, the King's coronation, or my beloved last night of the proms, but flags that are there to tell me I am not welcome. So it is no wonder, with this message of exclusion everywhere you look, flags being flown across the country, right-wing politicians given vast amounts of airtime, wealthy Christians funding right-wing and often racist media, poorly researched books trying to disprove what respected historians have already proved about the treatment of our ancestors, and even speeches in this chamber, a constant barrage that you cannot escape, that people of global majority heritage will experience disproportionately high mental health challenges. And so it will be essential that as we recognise the importance of the spiritual and pastoral role of the church in supporting those who experience mental health challenges, we understand that this cannot be done effectively unless we look at the bigger picture of social exclusion and injustice that contributes so significantly towards it. I support this motion. Thank you.
just to say, I will call you in pairs at the end of the next speech. Thank you.
Muriel Robinson, 344 Lincoln. Thank you for calling me Chair. I'm speaking to support this motion and the amendments, not just in my own right, but also to bring to Synod the support and views of Robert Thompson, who's unable to be with us after a recent eye operation. I want to speak in particular about clergy mental health. Robert had hoped to bring an amendment making more formal training of ordinands in terms of placements mandatory. I can't do that. But I would want to support his view that a mental health placement would be of great value to all ordinands. I'm a clergy child, if it's not too late to say that at nearly 72. My dad went into the church when I was 7 as a late ordinand. He had a 1-year training course in Rochester. When I was 19, he moved from a group of parishes just outside King's Lynn to another outside Norwich. And that automatically also made him chaplain of a large mental hospital, as it was called then. No choice, no training, just it came with the job. Now, he was an ex-captain in the Royal Artillery. He'd been through the Second World War. He'd been in post-war Germany, helping to deal with the aftermath of Belsen. He'd a lot of life experience. He was completely out of his depth and unprepared, even as an experienced parish priest nearing his 60th birthday. And he almost found it too much for him. That's a long time ago. Given how much more complex and sophisticated our current understanding of mental illness is, and the number of parishioners any priest is likely to see who have some degree of mental health issues, it seems crucial that we should prepare ordinands properly. And I'd urge every diocese and TEI to think about what more they could do in this area. But secondly, the mental health and priests and their families is also something which deserves proper support. In the Diocese of Lincoln, we've recently been able to develop a scheme whereby all clergy and their families have direct access to a range of support services, including counselling and health support. It's actually relatively cheap for the diocese, and they can access this for free. There are no gateways, they can just call, they don't have to come through us. And even our recent decision to pay for gardening services is partly generated in terms of thinking about clergy stress. For every clergy person who actually finds cutting the lawn a stress buster, there are at least one, and probably more, who just see that as an extra burden. So by saying, it's okay, you can have a gardener, they'll do that, we'll pay, it's really actually been very well received. So it hasn't cost us a lot, and in terms of cost benefit, I think there's a real payoff in terms of reduced clergy stress and absence, as well as the deeper benefits of supporting our clergy and their well-being. So please support this motion, and then go back to your dioceses and try and see what similarly small steps could be taken to benefit both ordinands and serving clergy. Thank you.
I now call Kate Wharton and the gentleman in the black sweatshirt near the back row. Thank you.
Kate Wharton, Liverpool 157. Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful to my colleague, Dr. Jamie Harrison, for bringing this motion to Synod, and to the Reverend Professor Christopher Cook for his very helpful paper. I've been a member of this Synod for almost 11 years, but still found myself shocked to learn that we haven't directly discussed issues around mental health since 2008. In the almost 21 years since I was ordained, our understanding of issues relating to mental health has changed enormously, both in the church and in wider society. It's right that we're discussing this today. When I trained for ordination, there was no real input on mental health. That's not a reflection on my excellent TEI, but more a sign of the priority given to such issues at that time. There was also nothing in my IME2 training. And yet over the course of my ordained life, I have come into contact with people dealing with a huge range of mental health issues, more times than I could possibly count. By far the best thing I've ever done to increase my learning in this area was the mental health first aid training, provided free to me by the academy which my wonderful deanery has set up. I found it so valuable that I went on to do the next level of qualification and paid to do the exam online. I strongly support the suggestion in the motion that dioceses review their provision in this area and commend the MHFA course to that end. This motion doesn't only speak to my ministry context, however, it's also personal for me. Over those same 21 years, I've suffered on several occasions from severe depression and debilitating anxiety. The depression has come and gone in waves, as seasons of dark grey clouds have from time to time settled overhead and stubbornly refused to move on for many months. The anxiety has been a more recent visitor, one of the many unwelcome symptoms that perimenopause has brought in its wake. I've shared this part of my life with very few people, though I'm grateful for the wonderful friends who have walked alongside me in the dark times. I'm also very grateful for antidepressant medication and for therapy. I've chosen to share this today in this significantly more public forum because as I read and prayed through this motion, it simply felt like the right thing to do. I'm not ashamed of the mental health challenges I've faced and am likely to face again in the future. They're part of my life, much like my dodgy left shoulder and my asthma. But I found them to be significantly more difficult to talk about, particularly as a church leader. Society has moved on over the past decades in its understanding of mental health, and we now have a much better vocabulary for it. But nevertheless, stigma and misunderstanding still abound. There have been too many spaces in which I felt unable to share this part of my life, worried about what sort of response it would receive, concerned that people would treat me differently, unsure as to whether or not I was in a safe enough place to do so. That isn't the way it should be. Church should be the very safest of spaces for all of us. I want to be part of a church, and indeed part of a synod, where we can be honest and open about all of our struggles, very much including those relating to our mental health. One of my favourite authors and speakers, Brené Brown, signs off her email newsletters with the words, "Stay awkward, brave, and kind." I think I've covered a couple of those in this speech. So Synod, church, whatever else we do, as we face an ever-growing mental health crisis in our world, in our church, among our clergy, let's be kind. Thank you.
Hello, Joel Plant, number 497, co-opted young adult from Leicester Diocese. This is my debut speech. And before I talk about the motion, I just wanted to thank you for voting to allow 5 of us to come in and your support for this week. 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with OCD. It's something that I've lived with for my whole life, but was diagnosed 7 years ago. And in particular, a struggle in OCD can often be moral issues, which is called scrupulosity. That means that people, Christians or of other faiths and no faith, struggle with moral dilemmas and particular anxiety around whether they are a bad person. The church, I admit, has not always been a great space because of this for me. And I think that we can do better to help people to access the church whilst not feeling guilty. In fact, to help normalise the medication, as Kate so wonderfully did just there, I actually took a propranolol tablet to speak today, otherwise my heart would be. I also am currently doing a master's in mental health, and so this is a massive sort of topic of interest for me. And I feel that today, possibly, this motion has come up as a God incidence that I am here today. I wanted to go through the future steps, and point A I think is commendable. I think particularly, as I've mentioned, that church and sort of the conduct of teaching is really important in the scope of mental health. We have to make sure that it's pastoral before anything else. And that is a particular learning from my journey. For point B, I would like to draw attention to the proposers that Ben West, a popular activist in the field of mental health after losing his brother, has actually secured training for all teachers as part of their teacher training, and so I would just draw attention to that. Point C, I think, is another great point. And actually, I'd like to go a step further and suggest to the officers that carry this out that it could be great to have a professional, or even better, an expert by experience involved in that liturgical work. And for point D, I think we all know how stretched and pressured the clergy are, but in the last few years since my mum started undergoing the ordination process, let me tell you, it's worse than you can imagine. I do think that there's one slight omission in the paper, and I will just draw attention to it, in that there's a lot of risk factors mentioned. I thought neurodivergence was missing. As someone neurodivergent myself, I thought that was something that really should probably be present. I think I wouldn't call neurodivergence mental health. I think they are separate. But I think we could possibly squeeze in, without an amendment, neurodivergence under the scope of mental health and get it in that way. Broadly then, I speak in support of this motion and draw attention, as I've said, to the particular points that I've raised. But yes, I commend it as a fabulous motion. Thank you.
I'm very mindful of the time and the number of people that want to speak in the main debate, so I'm now going to turn to the amendments. So I will invite Will Harwood to move the amendment at item 49, and he has 5 minutes.
Will Harwood, Truro 230. The Business Committee summary of General Synod describes this mental health and the church motion in the following terms. This proposes modest steps to deepen the understanding of mental health within the church and to foster a culture of sensitive and effective adjustments to enhance access and inclusion. My amendments seek to make these steps a little less modest and a little more impactful in what is an absolutely crucial area, as we've already heard, in the church and its ministry. I'm really grateful to Jamie for his kind and helpful input in crafting my amendments, as this is my first amendment that I've ever made, and I'm quite scared. I just feel strongly as a minister in a local parish that the amendment should have more teeth. As GS 2420 so helpfully outlines, there is a mental health crisis across all parts of our society. And as more and more people need our support in this debilitating and often taboo area of our lives, those in ministry need to be better equipped to do so. I wanted to make the motion more explicit in its requirements of IME and CME courses in providing mental health support training for clergy. Being in my 7th year of ordained ministry and my 4th year of incumbency, we have had much on managing change and being an inspirational vision caster in my IME and CME, but not much on how to even begin to meet the needs of those whose mental health issues and complexities are so acute and beyond the day-to-day. Having chatted to my own DDO about this, it became clear that fitting in more material in the already crowded initial and continuing ministerial education programs would be a challenge, as Jamie has rightly noted. But it's urgent. It's an urgent challenge that we need to meet if we're to serve those with whom, among whom, for whom, and to whom we minister. We know that God calls us to minister to the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. We know David in the Psalms and Paul in 2 Corinthians and many other places lay bare their emotional and psychological challenges. Reverend Professor Chris Cook himself has authored many pieces of work on the overlap between the spiritual and psychological worlds. Paul refers to Luke, the gospel writer, as the beloved iatros, where we get the word doctor from, and then psychiatros, the doctor of the soul or the mind, psychiatric doctor. The realm of mental health is one into which we must be equipped and enabled to tread and to speak as Christian leaders. But how? Well, I recently received an email from a member of the National Safeguarding Team with the following signature at the bottom. I wish I could show you on the screen, but I'll describe it. I am a mental health first aider. Please do get in touch if you would like to talk. And a beautiful logo at the bottom with MHFA England at the bottom. This person has taken a mental health first aid course. Now, my friend Kate Wharton has totally stolen my thunder by already mentioning MHFA courses, and I'm really grateful for that. In much the same way as I learned how to put people in the recovery position and administer an EpiPen at first aid training courses when I was a school teacher, the MHFA courses equip frontline workers with the skills to offer support with common mental health issues. And as Kate explained, they open the door for further training, conversation, and equipping. But I found myself asking when I saw this email signature, why don't I know about this? In our weekly Jericho Road service with the homeless and vulnerably housed of Truro, I meet people who are in mental health crisis, addiction, experiencing current episodes, and processing a lifetime of trauma. Yes, I'm a very nice vicar. Yes, I will pray with them. Yes, I will share Christ with them. And I'm a good listener. And of course, my safeguarding antennae are always up. But why have I not been equipped by my TEI or my IME or even CME to offer better mental health first aid? I hope you can support this motion and this amendment so that all Christian leaders can care about this and champion this and get this. The diocese need to be training their ministers in how to access and pass on and flag up and recognize mental health issues. We can't do this ourselves. We need to know when we can signpost people to those who are beyond ourselves, the mental health professionals, the NHS services. I beg to move the amendment that stands in my name.
I will now invite Jamie Harrison to respond and indicate whether he will accept this amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to accept. It really sharpens the motion. I'm very grateful to Will.
As Jamie has accepted this amendment, it is now open for debate. Could I ask the gentleman here and Nick? Thank you.
Jonathan Macy's Southwark 224 and chair of NECN, the National Estates Churches Network. Thank you for calling me, Chair. I have an interest in this for two reasons. Before I was ordained, I ran care homes for people with learning disabilities. I also did chaplaincy work in secure wards as well. Anyone who struggles to get through the world as I see it will be prone to mental health issues. But the other key reason is my experience of the parish in low-income areas. A couple of years ago, I said in a speech, the churches with the fewest resources face the highest and most complex needs. To be a vicar in a low-income area, rural, urban and coastal, invariably means that you encounter really high needs without the resources to meet them. People with mental health needs and disabilities are hugely represented in low-income areas, and that's before you even encounter the people living in the community collapsing round them, causing the mental health needs. This has to be resource, and it isn't just money. It has to be people. Lone working is exhausting. Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, not on their own. The other thing was, when I landed in my own church 12 years ago, I had not been trained for what I encountered. Not even close. The learning curve that I was going on was mad. God's been good. But as a chair of NECN, I am seeing people just falling apart under things they simply weren't prepared for. And in an age of cuts, those resources just become fewer and further between. I thank the church commissioners for looking this in the eye. Don't take your eye off that ball, please. But this isn't just cash. There is the compassion for us church leaders who encounter those stresses, and that has to be resourcing and proper training for us to then help those we encounter in the parish. I support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to reduce the speech limit to 3 minutes on this amendment.
Nick Land, York 437. I am a psychiatrist, and I often give seminars to churches and Christian health professionals to help them consider mental health issues within a biblical worldview. And in my experience, churches often make one of 2 serious errors. They're either so frightened of mental health services that they can discourage seriously ill Christians from getting essential clinical help, or they uncritically accept all secular interventions so that people who would benefit from biblically informed pastoral care end up receiving interventions that actually undermine their faith. So whilst I support this motion, my plea would be that the training and guidance it requests would reflect both biblical theology and the real strengths that churches have to offer in building mental health and resilience. For example, Genesis 1 and 2 reveal that humans are created to have 5 crucial sets of relationships with God, with other people, with nature, with work, and themselves. And Genesis 3 outlines, however, how humanity's rebellion damages these relationships. Humans hid from God. Man blamed woman for his mistakes. Nature grew thistles. People are filled with shame, and work becomes frustrating. And in fact, you can map the big major models of mental health or mental illness, etiology and treatment, onto these 5 damaged sets of relationships. So existential models map onto our relationship with God, social onto our relationship with other people, biological onto nature, psychological onto the relationship with ourselves, and cognitive behavioral onto our relationship with the environment through work. So you can make a good case that these mental health treatments are common grace gifts given to us to limit the damage that's caused by living in our broken world and by being broken people. And where they have good research evidence and they're not antagonistic to the gospel, then we should use them. But we mustn't ignore the healing potential of a good church. A good church is going to be absolutely full of people with mental health difficulties because it reaches out to those who are broken, which is many of us, most of us, and those on the margins. But a good church is also a wonderful resource for those people to develop mental health and resilience as it builds relationships with the living God through word and sacrament. It helps people resolve shame through the forgiveness of sins in Jesus. It heals social relationships through forgiveness and gives the opportunity for creative work for the common good. This paper helpfully points out that there is increasingly wide acceptance that care of the whole person should address spiritual as well as biopsychosocial concerns. But let's not be ashamed of the gospel. And when we're talking about our churches, our schools, or our clergy, let's make sure that that spirituality is unashamedly Christian. I support this motion as amended.
Before I call the next speakers, is there anybody who wishes to speak against this amendment? Okay, that's quite clear. So if you could stand again, thank you. The member second row back in the red shirt. Yes, that's right. Apologies. And then the member in the navy blue. Thank you.
Yeah, not that tall. Helen Lamb, Oxford 380. I'm very grateful to support this amendment and thankful to Will for his amendments coming into the main motion just to make it that bit sharper. I want to speak on 2 fronts. Number 1 is as a layperson for whom these matters are personal, in family, in small groups, in church life, and particularly as a member of a church with a university on our doorstep, from which we have a number of young adults, and for whom it's a delight to see their openness and their willingness to share their mental health and well-being challenges, but also a great distress as to some of what people of that age are regularly and not infrequently experiencing. There are 2 key reasons that I want us to think about how we support this amendment, though, and the reason I'm very grateful, it highlights IME2 and CME. The first is that, clergy, you're not on your own, so I'd really love it if the IME2 and CME review could include how clergy mobilise and use the lay resources in their churches. Pastoral care of our churches is a collective effort. We love one another in church. We walk alongside each other. We are family. So please could it also include how we can engage in helping one another to do that well. And please, although your dog collar might well invite quite a lot of disclosures spontaneously and in addition, please could you then be thinking about, as you partner with your lay people, how you encourage them and how you make sure you're aware when matters are becoming more than mental well-being issues or walking alongside people, but also becoming something that we need to escalate. And that brings me to the second reason that I really support this amendment, which is that we do need to be mindful, as has already been shared, that acute crisis and particularly serious issues are in partnership with clinical resources, and we all know that they're massively stretched. Our experience with the university is that other organisations are beginning to step into that breach. So the university has extraordinary resources that they're able to provide, and in the local context, IME2 and CME are much better equipped to be the people understanding what is available and encouraging clergy to use that. I'd also just wonder, with our new Archbishop of Canterbury and her experience and expertise, whether the Church of England might have a grounded role to be helping the NHS as it figures out how to adapt to the changing environment and the needs that we have in our population. It is enormously sad to watch young people debilitated and prevented from studying, growing, engaging in life because of mental health challenges and being told there's a 3-year waiting list before they're going to see any kind of material support or care that they need. We know that these things get more serious the longer they go on. So please, use your lay people, be mindful of your local context, and please could we look at how that is much more effectively done in the local diocesan context. Thank you.
Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." When people are struggling with their mental health, there is nothing more important for them than to hear of the rest Jesus can offer and the hope we have in the gospel. But as a GP, I know that this alone is rarely enough. People need medication, specialist therapy, and appropriate support from mental health professionals, as well as gospel truths. These are gifts from God to help us flourish in a broken and painful world. People often turn to church in times of particular difficulty, and so therefore it isn't beyond the realms of possibility that someone might be in the midst of a mental health crisis when they walk through our church doors for the first time. And not only that, mental health problems can affect anyone at any time. The young mum battling postnatal depression, the widow despairing in grief, the teenager struggling with panic attacks, or the person trying to deal with the voices in their head could all be sitting in our pews on any given Sunday. So often, my patients tell me that the trigger for finally making the appointment to see me has been a friend or family member who has mentioned their concerns or encouraged them to seek help. If we don't specifically train and educate our ministers on recognising the signs and symptoms of significant mental health problems, how can we expect them to effectively care for those sheep God has put in their midst? Courses like the Mental Health First Aid give practical skills that help us identify when someone might be struggling and when they might need that extra support. And so this sort of training should surely be included in IME and CME courses so that our ministers can holistically care for those that God has entrusted to them. I wholeheartedly support this motion and this amendment.
Synod, I'm conscious of time and all that we've got to go through, so I am going to propose a motion for closure on this debate, on the amendment, which we will do by a show of hands or green ticks or red crosses on Zoom. So all those in favour of closure on item 49, please indicate. All those against? That is carried. We now come to the vote on amendment for item 49, which we will do by a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. So all those in favour? Against? That is carried. Synod, we now move on to the next amendment, and I invite Rebecca Chapman to move the amendment to item 50, and she has up to 5 minutes.
Rebecca Chapman, 414 Southwark. Thank you, Chair. Synod, in this debate, we are hearing some really powerful stories about those impacted by their own mental health. I bring this amendment to offer us the opportunity to better support another group hugely impacted by this issue. Children and young people who live with or care for those with mental health challenges. Because 68% of women and 57% of men who have mental health struggles are also parents. I was brought up by my mum in a single-parent family. I had a nice home, went to a really good school, but my childhood was challenging. Doing safeguarding leadership training recently, I really balked at how incredibly high I scored on the Adverse Childhood Experiences charts. Multiple divorces and my mum's depression through my childhood had a huge impact on me. And to be honest, it wasn't something I really comprehended until I became a parent myself. It's funny how you don't realise what normal looks like until you see something different. As a child, I couldn't understand why my mum struggled to get out of bed sometimes, or why she would weep driving me home from youth club, so I felt like I needed to grab the steering wheel to avert disaster driving across the Bristol Downs. I can remember her threatening overdose and knew that as a doctor this was something she had the power to actually make happen. Our stunning local landmark was the Clifton Suspension Bridge, popular with local teenagers for drinking and also with suicidal jumpers. And my mother would sometimes say jumping off it was her intent, get into our Land Rover Discovery and drive away, not returning for hours. I would tell my little sister everything was fine, whilst anxiously taking up a vigil at my bedroom window, praying and looking for her return, my ears straining for the sound of the car engine. Later in my teens, my mum was diagnosed with a severe lifelong mental health condition and was sectioned and was able to get the treatment that she so badly needed. Seemingly small things have had a really lasting impact on me and the ways that I behave and the choices that I make. Some of you will know how tricky I find unsolicited hugs, having seen me back away from you lightly in the tea room. At one point during therapy, my mum was told that a certain number of hugs a day would help her recover. She duly told my sister and I that it was our role to provide her with those hugs, and we didn't get to choose if we did it or not. Friends, God is good, and my church was my place of safety in the storms, and in everything, really. In 2022, a government report described how the presence of emotional connection, shared experiences, strong, positive, and enduring relationships, and the ability to depend on one another for practical and emotional support with those inside, or crucially outside, a child's family, are a power that provides a shield from life's challenges. For me, that protective effect, that special power, was provided by my church. Week in and week out, as I moved up through children's and youth groups, attended Sunday services, and made some quite suboptimal life choices as a teenager, they were there for me. They prayed for me. No hugs were demanded, no threats were made. They were calm, they were compassionate, they were consistent. They shared the gospel of God's grace, and they showed me his unconditional love. Synod, we know that we live in a fallen and broken world. We cannot prevent storms from coming. Young people and young carers can be overlooked sometimes by mental health professionals when providing care to parents, understandably, because you deal with the patient in front of you. Our churches and our schools have the power to provide a protective effect for children impacted by parental mental health. We can help mitigate its impact. We can help God to break patterns, perhaps that go back through generations. The Royal College of Psychiatrists research suggests that in a class of 30 children, on average, 8 of those children will have a parent with mental health challenges. Please, Synod, vote for this amendment, which I now move, and help our churches and schools be better able to understand and thus emotionally support these children and young people. Thank you.
I now invite Jamie Harrison to respond and to indicate whether he will accept this amendment.
Thank you, Chair. Very happy to accept this. Bex and I had conversation. I tried to improve it, couldn't. Go with it, please.
As Jamie has accepted this amendment, it is now open to debate, and the speech limit will be 3 minutes. The gentleman standing there in the black and the gentleman in the red jumper, please. Thank you.
Chair, thank you for calling me. My name is James McCluskey, 084 Chelmsford, parish priest of St James the Great East Hill. I'm the rector of the parish. I have a church school and help another church school outside of my parish. Chair, I really thank Dr Harrison and those that have offered the other amendments to this because it speaks a theological framework which I would suffer and struggle to articulate of the hard school of parish ministry. The paper mentions in paragraph 12 of the Church's unique role as a sanctuary, a place of holy space, a place of welcome, but I've paid the physical cost of having an open church, not least on one occasion, soon after I was inducted as a parish priest, when after a service rehearsal, sanctuary service rehearsal, we stopped with a break with pizza and refreshments with parents present. Unbeknown to me, a stranger approached into the church. I couldn't see him, and I suffered a real egregious attack. Physically, I was beaten, I was spat upon, I was bitten, and it was really awful. The mothers put the children into a safe space, called the police. The police took what seemed like an eternity to arrive. But no less subsequently, as time moved on, it was revealed to me that the attacker suffered from severe mental health issues, a profound diagnosis, but complicated by other drinks and drugs. But he was a mother's son. Fast forward to another occasion when there was more ferociousness, but a different kind, when a woman knocked on the door in the early hours of the morning because her safe house had been breached. The person that she was trying to avoid had subsequently found out where she lived, and she was in a dreadful condition, one has to say. My wife and my children rallied around, but it reminded me of something else in paragraph 3 of the Curate Animarum, which I mentioned yesterday. This is one such soul knocking on the door of the church looking for sanctuary. I was ill-equipped, but only through determination and probably ginger hair, that I was prepared to make sure that what wasn't formed in my training, perhaps I could seek the support of other experts elsewhere. Subsequently, I partnered with a community interest company in my parish and we found resources, £200,000, to build a clinical room in our church halls, offering 10%, tithing 10% to community interest, through a community interest company, working with NHS and health professionals, giving back 5 loaves, 2 fishes, providing clinical care and offering support for mothers and our local school where they could come and receive free professional care. I support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Mark Bennett, Oxford 184. I support the motion wholeheartedly. I support Rebecca's amendment wholeheartedly too. It's good to see mental health being highlighted in this way. I'm a member of the Oxford Diocesan Board of Education. That is in part a declaration of interest. For some years, we've been encouraging our schools to use a resource developed by our chaplaincy advisor, former chaplaincy advisor Charlie Kerr, called the Contemplative Toolkit, or refined now into Space Makers, a version with more supporting material and training. This material focuses on practices drawing on ancient Christian wisdom, including dwelling, how to make the Bible come alive when you read it, giving access to biblical resources in times of challenge, and mending, touching on the more difficult aspects of life, normalizing talking about difficulties which we've heard is hard, and giving children some appropriate agency in raising the issues that affect their lives. We've been training dozens of schools to use this material, which includes helping our pupils both to use and to lead the practices. And this, is, of course, helps young people to adapt such practices in their life and equips them with a certain amount of resilience. It's, in a sense, preventative. The resources were developed for use with primary school children, but have been used also with other young people, and there is a suite of material available for families. You can find it all on the Oxford Diocesan website. Janine Coker, who's Charlie's successor, who's recently in post, has been reviewing the use of these resources and reports that children have given 100% feedback that they feel calmer, closer to God, a growing spirituality, and a sense of blessing from what they've been involved with. Our motion, after we've passed, I hope, Rebecca's amendment, asks the National Society to provide further resources. but I'm sure that Spacemakers is not the only high-quality resource that's already available, and a better audit of what's available might also be useful. I would ask, therefore, for a sharing of existing material and good practice, which may already address much of the perceived need and reduce the need for additional work. I commend the motion, I commend the amendment. Please vote for them both.
Is there any member who wishes to speak against this amendment? Thank you. If you could stand again. The gentleman by the door in the centre and the member with the orange scarf. I think he's behind you, so thank you.
Nicholas Lebe, Savic 220. Thank you for calling me chair. Scripture tells us to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, and mind. Our minds are important to God because He made them. And so when people are suffering with mental health, we are duty-bound to care, love, and support them. But to do it well, we need to be equipped and to prioritize this area of ministry. And this motion calls for both and more. And I'm particularly grateful to my colleague Rebecca's amendment, which I fully support. I want to tell a story in support of this motion and amendment. Before my ordained ministry, I served as a youth worker in an area with multiple deprivation. I had an unforgettable experience which shook me and made me think seriously about young people and mental health. Our work was with young people who have come from very challenging backgrounds. Some were exposed to drugs, alcohol, and gang culture. A lot of them lived in fear. We took a group of these young people to a Christian youth camp, and after a great worship evening, one of the young people slipped back into his tent and attempted to commit suicide. But thank God for two other young people who saw him and notified others and quickly intervened. The ambulance responded promptly and he was rushed to the hospital. You can imagine the shock and the impact on the other young people. But while at the hospital around 2 a.m., I started to think about how a young person who earlier was so excited and engaged during worship could then leave and then try to take his life. I later learned that this young person had experienced bullying and abuse. As I reflected, I realized that there may be young people in our churches and youth group who on the outside may look okay, but are emotionally and mentally struggling. Mental health was a subject we didn't talk about in our youth group and the youth. And most of these young people have come from cultures or families where it was a taboo subject. But after the incident, we sought help and began to talk about it. And as a church, I believe we must create safe space to talk about mental health with our young people, and that includes training and resources. And so I'm glad that this motion calls for development of training materials for use in schools and children groups. In conclusion, I want to remind us that mental health challenges are not new phenomenon. People in the Bible also deal with it. King David, Elijah, Job, and St. Paul, and well-known biblical figures experience mental health struggles. But in their stories and through scripture, we see a God who draws near, offers comfort and help to those who struggle in mind and body. So Synod, let's support this motion and amendment so we can provide proper care and support to those who struggle with mental health.
Leslie Jones. Oh, hang on. Leslie Jones, Durham 105. Thank you for calling me chair. I'm standing to speak today as a training incumbent from a parish with 4 churches, 6 primary schools, and a parish that is seeking, like yourselves, to grow younger, to have greater contact with children and young people. I am so pleased to support this motion and this amendment, and like many colleagues in the room, I also minister in a low-income community, the challenges and struggles of which have already been outlined by Jonathan. In some of our communities, mental ill health is more noticeable, and I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that in some places it's clearer when someone is struggling, because the sooner we can support people, the sooner we can signpost people, the sooner we can work with other people in the household, children or the parents or the grandparents, then the better the quality of our pastoral care. This is coming to pastoral care as well as the well-being of ourselves, our team, and the wider community. And I'm fortunate, while most of my training and understanding has come post-ordination, I and about 60 colleagues in Durham received, you've already heard it, mental health first aid training during the lockdowns that not only supported our resilience at a time of great uncertainty, but is the gift that keeps on giving. But as I look at the team where I am at the moment and the work of our curates and myself in our local primary schools, I particularly love this motion and the strengthening of it to take into account IME training and ongoing training, because for me an important window is IME 1. I trained on Lindisfarne Regional Training Partnership alongside LLMs, alongside readers. And fast forward 14 years, there's a host of lay ministers training alongside ordinands. So if we can reach a point, I know it's down as a point in the future on the motion, we are not only reaching ordinands, but lay ministers. We're not just training people who will wear collars, but the wider team. And that's got to be a good thing, because no one person does everything in a parish. We are reliant on the goodwill and the sacrifice of the lay ministers and volunteers around us. I'd just like us to get to the point where in this country, having heard some of the harrowing stories this morning already, we can all respond as well as we can to people of all ages and stages of life. Thank you, Synod.
Synod, I'd like to propose closure on this debate on item 50, which we will do by a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. All those in favour of closure on item 50, please indicate. Those against? That is carried. We now come to vote on the amendment at item 50, which we will do by a show of hands, green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. All those in favour of item 50, please show. Those against? That is carried. Synod, we now move to our third amendment, item 51. Members may wish to reference the addendum to the financial statement in notice paper 10. So I invite Will Harwood to move his amendment, and he has up to 5 minutes.
Will Harwood, 230 Truro. Thank you again, Chair. And thank you again, Jamie and Reverend Professor Cook, for opening up this crucial discussion for us. And in particular for Clause D of the motion and the recognition of the fact that clergy need support not just in ministering to those affected by mental health challenges, but also with their own mental health challenges. I find myself asking the question, is it okay for clergy to be unwell? Well, my wife and I spent the post-Christmas week in Devon. Leaving Cornwall was clearly a mistake, and we caught the horrific flu virus, which I'm sure many of you have become familiar with. The fact that we probably caught it in church is another story. But we were laid up for a week or so when we arrived home just before the second Sunday of Christmas, there was no question that I would be preaching or presiding that day. So I stayed in bed instead. And it was okay for me to be ill and incapacitated for a week or more, and it was okay for me to talk endlessly about the flu with everybody ever since, as I've probably spoken to several of you about how awful it was. But is it okay for me to be unwell in other ways, mentally or psychologically? Is it okay for me to say to my congregants over tea and coffee, to chat about my own mental health challenges, my need for a referral to the NHS mental health team, my need of 7 years of counselling, My need of daily spiritual direction to live with my own spiritual and psychological scars? No, I don't think so. Mental health challenges are taboo. I don't want to look weak. I want people to look up to me and trust me as an inspirational spiritual leader. I don't want them to pity me as mentally unwell, broken man in need of psychiatric support. I may not be the only Christian leader in this room or indeed in the country who feels like this. And that's where this amendment comes in. I don't think I'm the only vicar that wants a little bit more importance stressed on the need for counselling and therapeutic support. When I saw this, I was really pleased, but I thought there's so much more that could be said here. My own diocese have given me financial support to access psychotherapy, and the excellent clergy wellbeing lead in the diocese has taken a keen pastoral interest in me and offered me continual care and ongoing support. But is this the experience of my colleagues and fellow vicars and ministers in every diocese? Do people know they can even access support and money for therapy? Do they have a support network and people at diocesan level they can trust to share these pains in a safe way? Truro Diocese excels in many ways. What can you expect when we live in the fairest and most Edenic diocese of all of them? But in respect of mental health support for clergy, Truro Diocese, in my experience, excels in supporting its clergy who seek help. So much as with Clause A, I immediately set about demanding that there be a funded review into the work of different dioceses on this issue. But then I came across the St. Luke's for Clergy Wellbeing's report into the mental health support across dioceses. This had already received, or they had already received, £100,000 from the Archbishop's Council, and had done a great piece of work, which I really encourage you to read, which had basically done everything I was calling for. So I got back into my box, and it became clear that my amendment ought to highlight that work and challenge dioceses to ensure that the best of the work in this crucial area becomes standard, not exceptional. I hope you can support this amendment so that this can be more and more the case across all of our dioceses. In my role as a governor at my daughter's primary school, I'm asked to monitor the provision of a new educational initiative whereby the best of educational needs, special educational needs strategies are applied to all pupils in all classrooms. They call it Making the Special Universal. As a proud and grateful member of a diocese where the mental health support for clergy is truly special, I'm asking that we make the special universal across all our dioceses. I beg to move the amendment that stands in my name.
I now invite Jamie Harrison to respond and indicate whether he will accept this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very happy. When he said Cornwall, he really meant Devon or even Durham. You never know, do you? But no, this is really helpful. It gives us more clarity and a very good report to follow up for St. Luke's.
As Jamie has indicated, he will accept this amendment. The item is now open for debate, and the speeches are limited to 3 minutes. Point of order.
Forgive me, I don't know the number. Fiona Macmillan, 357 London. Colleagues on Zoom are extremely frustrated that no one has been called to speak from Zoom, and I wonder whether the chair could be reminded that there are colleagues on Zoom waiting to speak as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I've heard your point of order, so thank you. Sorry, gentleman in the black clerical shirt and the member in the red cardigan, jump at the back, thank you. And I can just say nobody on Zoom is actually asking to be called at the moment, but I will make a note.
Joe Hawes, Deans 54, thank you for calling me. One of the more hierarchical and unpleasant titles for deans is a senior priest. And a way of interpreting that more helpfully is as a sort of shop steward for the clergy in a diocese, taking the temperature of mental health and well-being. In supporting this amendment, a plea that I would make is that focus is given in dioceses to help coping strategies be put in place for clergy, for lay staff and volunteers, when in receipt of central funding for specific projects. The unintended consequences of receiving funding from Central Church for a specific project aimed towards numerical growth in a parish or chaplaincy is that you're powerfully aware that you have a large responsibility because you've received funding. And an unintended consequence can be a real cost to mental health because of those pressures. No one intends it to be like that. But when in St Edmundsbury and Ipswich, we have recently been auditing the outcome of several initiatives, we have become powerfully aware of the substantial cost to clergy and lay staff and volunteers of seeking to be responsible for centrally allocated funds, for numerical growth, and for financial stability and sustainability. It's been very good to know that SMIB has become powerfully aware of the need to be more realistic of the expectations which are placed upon those who administer these projects. But nevertheless, the self-imposed awareness of just what you are due and just what you need to respond to can often lead to a very substantial cost in mental health for clergy, lay staff and volunteers. So I would like to see dioceses working more closely with Central Church to provide coping strategies for centrally allocated funds and how they are implemented so that this very real cost can be mitigated and ameliorated. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Liz Olson, Chester 281. I support this amendment. I've seen recently that the Telegraph, sometime in the last 2 years, had an article that claims that up to 30% of clergy may be suffering from depression at any one time, citing tiredness, isolation, demoralization, financial anxiety as contributing factors. I feel quite passionate about this because I have been greatly privileged to receive over a year's worth of counselling completely free of charge because the missionary organisation I worked with offered it in some places. I was working in Nairobi, Kenya when I was helped. The counsellor was a Christian, so we were on the same page to begin with, a massive advantage. The experience made a tremendous difference to me. And I would love to see such help offered to our clergy without them having to worry about the cost involved or whether the number of sessions offered would be adequate, or whether anything said could become known in the church, or whether the counsellor would understand where a Christian is coming from. We do not want to lose our clergy, and the NHS is overwhelmed and often inadequate where mental health is concerned. Also, the church can provide counselling from Christians, unlike the NHS. We want the whole person to be healthy, and mental and spiritual needs are closely connected, so why shouldn't the church provide for mental as well as spiritual needs? I've done an extremely rough search into counselling provision in some of our dioceses, and note that the most that was offered by them, by any of the ones I looked into, was 12 weekly sessions, possibly followed by another 12, but only under exceptional circumstances, and it wasn't all free, and many offered much less than that. For some people, that may be enough, but certainly not for all. The paper points out that the Church of England has no strategic national response and no coordination, so I appeal to the church to look to this as a matter of urgency. What more can be done to offer more counselling, whether from counsellors from a diocese or by arrangement with other Christian counselling organisations, for example, St Luke's for Clergy Wellbeing, to get as close as possible to what I was offered, which was completely free, which was for as long as I needed it, which was from a Christian, and which was completely confidential. That should be our goal for our clergy and their families, and hopefully for laity too. Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak against this amendment? I think I'll still call you though. Thank you. Yeah. Could I call Bishop Ruth Worsley?
Chair, very kind of you, thank you. Mark Miller, Durham 107. Can I begin by honouring all who have spoken about their own mental health? And if time allows, I'll do the same at the end of my speech. I welcome this paper, this motion and this amendment and the seriousness with which we are discussing mental health, and in particular at this point, clergy mental health. The data on isolation and depression amongst clergy should make us all think. I would like to frame this through something that we have already agreed, though, as a church, which is the Clergy Wellbeing Covenant. As I understand it, the covenant is not primarily about access to services, it is about relationship. It spoke of mutual trust, open communication, shared responsibility, reasonable expectations, and clergy being known and valued. It is, in essence, a commitment to culture and relationship. We also need to acknowledge the structure and context in which clergy are serving. Over recent years, the number of stipendiary clergy has reduced. At the same time, episcopal numbers have remained the same, and diocesan teams in many places have grown in size and specialism. Whatever the reason for these developments, the experience on the ground at the coalface of parish ministry is fewer parish clergy carrying more responsibility in increasingly complex systems. In that context, mental health cannot be addressed only by training or post-crisis support, as important as they are. Prevention is relational before it is procedural. It is shaped by whether clergy experience diocesan life as partnership and mission or as management from a distance. The covenant speaks of shared responsibility, and that must include diocesan and episcopal attentiveness, realistic expectations, and cultures in which clergy are genuinely known, not only when there is a problem. The most profound moment in my licensing was when my bishop and I knelt together, symbolizing a ministry that we share. If we're serious about clergy well-being, then alongside developing resources and supervision modules, we must attend to structures and cultures in which clergy serve. Otherwise, we risk treating symptoms while the deeper problems remain unexamined. So following my wonderful colleague's example, let me mention and give thanks to St. Luke's for Clergy Wellbeing. It was through them that I experienced the value of a life-changing therapist, and who, after a 5-year gap, I will be returning to again this week, largely as a result of some of the problems I've just described. The advantage, though, of being in London is I may actually meet them face to face for the first time instead of on a little screen. I will be surprised at how tall or short they are. But I do want to urge any of my clergy colleagues, if you are struggling with mental health, please consider getting in touch with St. Luke's or come and talk to me. I will be happy to share my experiences with you. Thank you, Synod.
Ruth Worsley, Liverpool 26. Before ordination 30 years ago, I undertook some training as a nurse. The training I had in acute mental health care stood me in good stead for the pastoral ministry of a priest. I contributed a little to the acute care within the hospital in which I trained by introducing spiritual care to the nursing care plan. But I learnt far more myself about how, as a priest, I should attend to the needs of the whole person as I ministered to them. Inevitably, it was when I was a curate with my training incumbent on sabbatical that someone approached me, having been told by their consultant psychiatrist that they needed to see a priest. Over the next 7 years, we journeyed together through many episodes of disassociation, in which I had moments of spiritual insight through deep conversations with the different personas that she revealed. In the absence of an experienced clergy colleague, I sought supervision from a pastoral tutor at Theological College who was a professional counsellor with expertise in the field of dissociative behaviours. This monthly supervision ensured that I didn't doubt my own sanity whilst trying to care for my friend, and that I avoided some of the dangerous pitfalls and inevitable mistakes that I made. I welcome this motion and the emphasis on mental health training and for counselling provision for clergy, as this amendment offers. And I would want to also extend that provision to the requirement of pastoral supervision for all clergy. Many of us recognise its deep value personally. But unlike many other professions, this is not a necessary requirement for such provision for priests. Please, would those of us who are responsible for the provision of training consider pastoral supervision as a necessity too? Thank you.
I'm conscious that there may be people who want to speak against this motion, so if you could stand if you want to speak against this motion. Emma Robarts, please.
Emma Robarts, St Albans 395. I'd love to be able to support this amendment, as I welcome Reverend Will Harwood's amendments to try to give the motion more teeth. But I fear that even his amendments to D are a sticking plaster unless we have more clergy to take the pressure off the rest and address the ticking time bomb on clergy numbers. When you look at the C of E's numbers, it is clear that the trend is that parish clergy posts are being cut. This increases the pressure on other clergy. It also deters people from following their vocation because they fear that there won't be posts for them. I agree, there is an epidemic, particularly post-COVID, of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and loneliness. We see this in my community and my family, and my local church does what we can to assuage it. And I totally agree that this is happening to our clergy too. In fact, the Living Ministry Study and other research shows that they are much more likely to be depressed than the average. I'm standing here to advocate for the parish clergy because in the cloakroom this morning, I was practically mobbed by clergy, thanking me for what I said yesterday. Thank you, all of you parish clergy. Keep at it. As my late father would have said, box on. What they asked me to keep on banging my head against the wall and saying was, we need funding for more clergy. So for the clergy's sake, please get the moth out of the Church Commissioner's wallet to increase link for more priests. I was very, very grateful to hear the Archbishop of York saying yesterday that he agreed that we need more link. He's right, but we need it now. The accounts show that there is plenty of money. There is no point accumulating it, and there is no need to take it away from anything else. So no bishops need defend what they have. So please, let's not wait until July 27 to find more money. My late father spent the last 15 years of his life caring for my mother who has Alzheimer's. Faith is so helpful. Thank you.
Synod, I'd like to propose a closure on this debate, which we will do by a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. So all those in favour of closure on item 51, please indicate. All against? That is carried. We now come to the vote on this amendment, item 51, which we will do by a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. We now move back to the main debate and resume debate. I'm going to limit speeches to 3 minutes. Alice Kemp, and the member in the orange jumper, thank you.
Sorry about the delay. Alice Kemp, Bristol, 72. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Like many who have spoken, I have lived with mental health challenges on and off throughout my life. At times this has been severe, and I've been under the care of mental health services. I've also supported family, friends and colleagues, and through my work as a chaplain, through their own mental health illnesses. And over the years, my experience has been that it's become harder and harder to access support when I or others have been unwell, as the mental health services become more stretched. And for those of us who are neurodivergent, it is even more difficult. We are statistically much more likely to face mental health challenges after a lifetime of living in a world which wasn't set up for us. But the specialist mental health services we need rarely exist. When I am unwell, I really struggle with the church. The liturgy and the language used in many of our hymns and worship songs are at best overwhelming, and at worst serve to reinforce my own internal stigmas. Alongside that, people wanting to pray for me to be healed just ups my guilt levels, as I feel a failure for not being fixed when I'm not miraculously better. And I could go on. When I am unwell, church becomes a very challenging and occasionally dangerous place to be. So I am passionate about the ways we can make our churches places of sanctuary and belonging for all, rather than spaces that can unintentionally exclude people. And there are some great starting points in this motion as amended. In Bristol, we have trained up 3 instructors, I am one of them, as mental health first aid instructors. And we offer that training at a very minimal cost to everyone in our parishes and all our clergy. And we find that many of our curates take that up. We are also introducing our mental health short half-day awareness course as part of our curacy offer for all curates to do, which we hope will increase the uptake of the longer course. And finally, I'm chair of the Church's Accessible Liturgy Working Group. We are preparing a publication which will resource churches to become more inclusive in worship and liturgy. Within the resource, there is guidance on how we can have liturgy and worship that is more inclusive for those living with mental health challenges. And I look forward to being able to share this work and to signpost to the more in-depth work mentioned in the motion. Please support the motion.
Kat Aldred, Derby 296. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. I came to faith as a young adult, and during all of my adult life, I have experienced periods of depression and anxiety of various degrees of severity. Both my faith and my mental health are parts of what make me me. From my own experience, I believe that the way in which churches approach mental health can have a profound effect on people's mental and spiritual well-being. In the past, I have been part of churches where mental health was rarely discussed, and if mentioned, it was whispered about, where there was an implicit, if not an overt message, that poor mental health was a sign that one's faith was not strong enough, that more and the right kind of prayer would make mental ill health go away. That kind of church culture can bring feelings of isolation and of great shame. And I'm sure I don't need to tell Synod what incredibly damaging forces isolation and shame can be. My hope is that churches no longer approach mental health in that way, but my fear is that there are still those that do. I've also been part of churches like the church where I now worship, where mental health is spoken about openly, where church leaders talk and preach about their own mental health, where mental health is understood to be part of what makes us human. For me, this has been life-giving. I have become much more open in speaking about my own mental health because I feel seen, understood, and valued. I'm fully supportive of this motion because I think it seeks to support churches to be much more understanding and open about mental health. Despite the heroic efforts of NHS mental health staff, there are far too few of them to meet the demands of the mental health crisis. And I think there's a place for churches to provide essential support for mental and spiritual well-being. But how churches go about providing that support is of the utmost importance. They must be properly resourced. Otherwise, there are churches that could and would do this well, but there would also be instances where even well-intentioned churches could do more harm than good. This motion makes it clear that it's about churches supporting the mental health of both their congregations and communities, and that clergy mental health is properly supported. It's critically important that as churches, we don't view engagement with mental health as something that's being done to or for some other. We're not talking about some other them. We are part of us. I hope through this motion we can encourage church cultures where it's safe for people to be open, where we're seen, heard, understood, and valued as part of the body of the church, where we're willing to listen and learn together how we might be a force for good to combat shame and stigma. Thank you.
Call the Archbishop of Canterbury and Paul Waddell on Zoom.
Sarah Mullally, 001 Canterbury. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. I am grateful to Dr. Jamie Harrison and also Professor Chris Cox on behalf of the Mental Health Working Group for bringing this motion on mental health and the Church. I am very thankful for the members of Synod who have shared their personal experiences this morning. Since 2008, when mental health was last debated, we have lived through great change. The most significant of this was COVID. During this extraordinary time, many of us experienced fear, loneliness, and bereavement. The impact of COVID were not distributed equally. Evidence demonstrates great disparities across ethno-religious groups in infections, death, and also in mental health outcomes. Some of us will have experienced loneliness and isolation. Some of us may have had our underlying mental health worsen during that period. The effects on our well-being were many, and we need to recognise that they endure. I welcome this motion because in part it addresses young people, lay and clergy. Access to mental health support is essential because mental well-being is part of what makes a flourishing life. When Jesus declared that he came to bring life and life to the full, he spoke of every aspect of human experience. Since the 2008, the Mental Health Act has been updated, but there remains long waiting times, services are overstretched, which are not the same as for physical health. Community services remain under-resourced. At the same time, the government and health services has recognised that being part of a community, like a faith group, gives great support to one's well-being and sometimes even prevents crisis. We've heard from Synod about the research around the impact of being part of a faith community on being part of a faith community. Another part of the motion for which I'm grateful is its attention to liturgy. Our response will involve a pastoral response, but worship in itself is also a response. Liturgy offers space where people might find comfort and reassurance, joining the voices with others in prayer. There is much excellent work going on in our churches, in schools and in people's own home. One example is in South London, the South London Listens Partnership, which works with the NHS and faith groups and community groups to offer mental health champions. So yes, Helen, there is a role for us to work with and alongside the NHS. Synod, this motion is a call for us to recognise our power as a church to support mental health and our community. This motion offers an opportunity to turn our power into practical action. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me Chair. Paul Waddell, Southwark 418. Just a quick request that could colleagues, when amendments come up, speak to the amendments and not just the add and the amendment onto the end of their main motion speech. I'd like to really support this motion and particularly the as amended by Bex Chapman. When I was growing up, I grew up with a mentally unwell parent. My mother was unwell before my parents divorced and my father left. And she only got worse afterwards. She was often abusive and sometimes violent. My school attendance was very limited. I very rarely went. I moved school every year, not through any fault of my own. I ran away from home on several occasions until I gave up in the cold and came back home to be brought by the police, who saw my mother hug me, not knowing what was going to happen as soon as the doors were shut. Possible salvation arrived. I was quite good at music, and I was selected for my school to join a church choir, which was a source of joy to me. And my mother became part of the church congregation as well for the first time in our lives. It was our first experience of church. But at some point, I made a disclosure to the vicar of what was happening behind closed doors. Rather than deal with the issue, he attempted to excommunicate my mother so that the problem would go away. Eventually, I ran away from home to live with my father, who didn't really want me there and was dealing with having a new relationship with his second wife. So church failed due to a lack of training in that situation. But it also was in many ways salvation. Later in life, I came to know a church and be involved in the community of people who supported me and loved me. It wasn't mental health training, it was just normal people. And they were arguably my salvation. I think many of the reasons I've just disclosed are perhaps reasons why I'm a little bit eccentric and a little bit damaged and struggle maintaining deep relationships with people. But it's where we are. I think it's been okay. I also work in the NHS, and I see the outworkings of when mentally ill parents are not looking after their children. We take teeth out on a regular basis, several times a week, from kids who are not looked after properly because their parents are depressed or have other mental illnesses going on in their lives. So I'd really like to commend this to us. We have a unique role in society, in the church, to be able to reach people, and also to be able to support those who the system doesn't notice because they're not the actual presenting adult or child. Thank you.
I intend to take 2 more speeches and then test the mind of Synod when this has been sufficiently debated. So Stephen Race and Robert Lawrence on Zoom.
Stephen Race, Suffragans 053. I too am hugely grateful to Dr. Harrison for bringing this motion before Synod and would like to speak in its favour. Thank you to those whose personal testimony has grounded this debate in lived experience. I am one of those men who would rather not talk about his inner turmoil and recognise the inherent risks within this characteristic of mine, shared by too many people, men in particular. However, despite that, throughout my time in ordained ministry, and even before that as a teacher, I have been called upon to care for and somehow reveal God's love to people living with and offering suffering as a consequence various mental health needs. I know that I'm not alone in this. I speak also as a trustee of 2 charities, one that helps people, including those with mental health concerns, who struggle with official processes to access welfare support, and another that seeks to care for people with a wide variety of mental health needs, including neurodivergency, through the creative arts. Neither organisation is short of work and are always looking at how they can expand their reach. In recent years, I've had cause to visit people who had been placed in secure accommodation for their own safety and the safety of those amongst whom they live. These visits, and others that were less severe, together with the extra pastoral care required for them, that is, the additional care for their families, were often undertaken with a huge amount of trepidation on my part because, more often than not, I had no idea what I was entering into or doing. I relied heavily on intuition and the guidance offered to me by the individuals or the families themselves. This was never ideal. I therefore support the proposal contained in this motion to enable mental health training to become an integral part of all IME and CME programs. I appreciate that there are mental health first aid courses that can be and are accessed, as already mentioned by many, but they do not necessarily come with a particularly Christian perspective. As a church, we are called to look at one another through the eyes of Jesus and to care for each other with the voice and hands of Jesus. If the National Society could produce further appropriate material for schools, I would be enormously grateful. But please, a plea for school governors and academy trustees, who, along with everyone else within the school community, has a particular responsibility for those children and young adults who are having to deal with all that comes their way. Clause D mentioned, as amended, the need to care for those clergy who carry their burdens. I will conclude now.
Thank you.
Please do support this motion, even if I've not been able to finish my entire speech. Thank you very much.
Robert Lawrence, Newcastle 177. As a parish priest, having engaged in pastoral ministry in a variety of contexts and chaplaincies over many years, I support this motion wholeheartedly, with some observations about improving mental health awareness and education. In ensuring adequate training in mental health awareness, it's going to be important not to reinvent the wheel and to work in partnership with existing provisions and other agencies. For example, Mind has many helpful resources which can be used. The Diocese of Newcastle each year already offers the aforementioned mental health first aider training through MHFA England. I have trained on this. I heartily recommend it. For the support of clergy mental health, can I commend the Society of Mary and Martha in Devon with their retreats and programmes of support and their confidential online forums for any and all clergy. For schools, there are already loads of initiatives, and it would make much more sense to join with the local authority or support local mental health youth organisations rather than starting from scratch. There has of late been an increasing understanding of neurodivergence, which has already been mentioned. But alongside that, everyone working with people should have a basic understanding of attachment and developmental trauma, which underpins much of mental distress. One of my parishioners commends Beacon House as a great resource for this. And yet another consideration for all of us in pastoral ministry is the fate of care leavers and the impact that this has on their mental health. Private children's homes have mixed impact, and children generally would be better off placed in families than in places with changing staff teams. But across many local authorities, adoption support has been cut, and it's scandalous how little help adoptive parents are given and how often they are blamed for placement breakdown. Could we, as a church, do more to raise this as a social issue that needs addressing for the benefit of wider mental health in our communities?
And I now wish to test the minds of Synod on whether item 11 has been sufficiently debated, and we'll do this by a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. So those in favour in the motion for closure? Those against? That is carried. I now invite Jamie Harrison to respond to the debate. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had 32 speeches, so I'll do my best. Just as a point of clarification, we have discussed neurodivergency quite a lot, quite rightly, but we have got another working group in that area, and the hope is they might come to Synod quite soon to bring a report and have a proper debate, so that's the plan. So I'll go in order, if that's okay. Kat, our first Kat, great, but we're very challenging with your words around society and the effect on GMH people. I'm saddened to hear it, but know about it in North Durham as well. To Muriel, yes, your father thrown into the work of a hospital chaplain without any preparation. I like your theme of gardeners for clergy. To Kate, very personal comments. Her work also to do the first aid training, really helpful. To Joel, from an old adult to a young adult, great to hear your first speech. sorry you had to take propanol, but it is a good drug. And I think you just explained to us how important it is for your voice to be heard in our liturgical developments. I'm grateful to Will for his amendments and those who responded to it. Jonathan particularly commenting about the lack of training needed and needs it. For Nick, his focus on biblical understanding of spiritual training. To Helen, again, a view about the importance of laity, as well as the importance of clinical resources for the NHS. And to my colleague Laura, again, a sense of the crisis which we know in the NHS isn't helping to give speedy response. Coming to Bex, obviously a painful amendment to have to make. I'm very grateful for that. Reflecting on her own experience, her mother's illness, but also the power of the church to be her support through all of that. And that, again, is a voice we can hear very well here. To James, again, a support for schools. And Mark Bennett from Oxford, the focus on resilience, building resilience. To Nicholas, his work as a youth worker, inspiring him and now into ordination. And to Leslie from Durham, her focus on the low-income communities and the pressures they particularly feel. Joe responded to the amendment from Will, I think, on the importance of coping strategies for those who feel that some of the latest strategies and so on are putting a lot of pressure on clergy. How do we manage that? To Liz, her experience from a mission society of being very supportive, we can learn from that. And to sneaky Mark Miller, jumping ahead, but also this experience of St. Luke's, which was very helpful to hear, and the covenant we have. To Bishop Ruth, the importance of pastoral supervision for clergy. That's something we could hear, I think, very well here. And to Emma, I'm sorry you couldn't support the amendment, but heard your concern for clergy, the pressure on clergy, and also perhaps the only mention of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, which is also part and parcel of what we're talking about. That was very helpful, thank you. So Alice, speaking very much from her experience, the chaplain, and also mentioning, thank you, liturgical texts, which we haven't heard too much about, but again, the involvement of those really interested in the text. So we heard the power of those texts to be really unhelpful, and some of the songs not to be that helpful either. To Sarah, thank you for your input, as ever. Again, a focus on liturgy from Sarah and also the impact of COVID since 2008. Very grateful for Paul on Zoom, his willingness to tell us about his experiences, the importance of school, but also his being moved around a lot, but also the church choir perhaps being a place of safety until things became more difficult. To Bishop Stephen, again, people not talking and how we need to break that down, and also the importance of accessing secure and safe spaces for these sorts of conversations. And to Robert on Zoom, yes, mental health training, again, we heard the value of that first aid training, but also his understanding of the resources that are already available. And perhaps we should find a way of bringing those together so that we can all experience them. Because one key issue is the differences across diocesan experiences and how together we can, from this debate, find a way forward to set some targets maybe for ourselves and those of us involved. So I'm very grateful for your engagement. I think it's been a very good debate. A lot of clarity, a lot of awareness brought out and experience from all of you. So I'm very grateful. Sorry for those who were standing who didn't get called. But do, if you've got a speech, do please send it in so we can also look at it and bring it together. And of course, in a little while, there will be the full transcript of this debate available for those who would like to look at that in more detail. So, Madam Chair, I'm very happy to offer this motion for a vote.
We will soon move to the vote, but because of the nature of the stories shared with us and the lived experiences, I'm going to ask the Archbishop of Canterbury to lead us in prayer before we move to the vote.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you know us, that you see us, and that you love us. We commit into your keeping the emotions that this debate has raised within us, the people that are on our minds and our hearts, those whom we have listened to. We ask that if your Holy Spirit is nudging us to now go and speak to somebody as a result of this debate, that we may heed that nudging. We give you thanks for all those who support us and our mental well-being. We ask this in the name of your Son, who came to bring us life in all its fullness. Amen.
We now move to vote on item 11, and this will be a show of hands or green ticks and red crosses on Zoom. So, all in favour? Against? That item is now carried, and we move to, I'm sorry, I can't remember what item we moved to. We move to the next item, item 12.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Synod. It is our final item of the morning, item 12, the appointment of external auditors. Members will need... Sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm speaking as loud. The microphone is on. How's that? Is that all right? Okay, thank you. So I do apologize. Members will need GS 2428, and I'd like to call on Peter Doyle to introduce this item. He may speak for up to 10 minutes.
Peter Doyle, 463 ex officio Archbishop's Council. Chair, members of Synod, it's a privilege to make my maiden speech at Synod today, and first of all to thank you for approving my appointment as a trustee of the Archbishop's Council at last July's group of sessions. Council did indeed appoint me to chair the Audit and Risk Committee, so it falls to me in my debut speech today to ask you to consider another appointment, that of the Archbishop's Council's auditors. The National Institutions Measure requires that the Council appoint its external auditors with the approval of General Synod. 5 years ago, you agreed the appointment of Crowe as the Archbishop's Council auditors for a term of up to 5 years. Crowe have served as well and were invited to be part of the competitive tender process to appoint an audit firm from the 2026 audit onwards. As outlined in GS 2428, we invited 6 audit firms to participate in the tender process. Staff held informal discussions with 5 firms and 3 submitted formal responses. And the decision to shortlist those 3 firms and invite them to make a formal presentation was actually quite an easy one. It was a much harder job to decide which of the 3 to recommend for appointment, having listed listened to their careful consideration of the most significant risks facing the Council and very thoughtful responses to a range of questions that were asked. However, on balance, there was a clear recommendation from the panel, both Audit and Risk Committee members and staff united, that Buzzacott should be recommended for appointment for the reasons set out in paragraph 9 of the paper. The Audit and Risk Committee and the Council itself subsequently agreed that recommendation, which is before you this afternoon. Crowe will complete the audit of the 2025 report and accounts for the Council and several other entities as listed in paragraph 11. And I have every confidence that they will work well with Buzzacott and our finance team to ensure a smooth and efficient handover. You may have noticed that I've not yet said anything about the proposed term of the appointment. This remains a little bit uncertain, given the greater uncertainties around the governance programme, which Synod will be aware of. So the proposal before you is that the term will be for up to 5 years, although the Council could decide to propose a change to Synod in any year. If Church of England National Services SENS is formed within that time, it's envisaged that Buzzacott would be its initial auditors, but obviously the SENS trustees may wish to review that decision in less than 5 years from now. If the Council, and checks for that matter, cease to exist in less than 5 years, then that appointment would naturally come to an end. I stand ready to answer any questions you have on the recommended appointment of Buzzacott as the Archbishop's Council auditors and move the motion standing in my name.
Thank you, Peter. That is now open for debate.
Debbie Buggs, London 353. I support the motion, and I want to thank the staff for all the time that has gone into that tender process. I've done one myself in my day job, and I know how time-consuming it is to run a process like that. And I think it's good that we've gone for a reputable mid-tier firm. And so all I want to do is give my best wishes to the finance team here, as they invariably will be doing some on-the-job training with the audit juniors who arrive in to look at the figures later on. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no one else standing. Peter, if you want to respond to Debbie, you're most welcome.
Well, Debbie, thank you for your support and for those words about the executive team and about Buzzacott. It's just worth perhaps emphasising that there is extra work for the team in any transition like this, and they have dealt with that in a very straightforward way, understanding that there is that extra work to do, and I'm very grateful to them as a team for their support for that and to me through this process. Thank you. Nothing further from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I now put item 12 to the vote. By a show of hands, those in favour, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. That concludes this item of business. Please enjoy your lunch.